Unclean, unclean, often accompanied by the ringing of a bell, was how someone in ancient Israel would announce that they have leprosy, the terrible bacterial infection that leaves the body mutilated and the person isolated from everything that they love. As we heard in our first reading, the leper was required by Jewish law to announce their presence when around others. They were required to live as outcasts from the social life, and yet more damagingly, from the religious life and religious practice. Today's first reading shows us how ancient people understood physical disease, or maybe misunderstood physical disease. Obviously, these regulations that were in place were for the good of the community. Infected peoples were a public health risk and had to be kept separate. However, for the infected person, the experience was one of misery and isolation. For the rest of their days, they had to live a life of solitude and marginalization, not knowing if they were ever going to be cured. They were considered a threat to those around them. The leper was cut off from normal social contact, even from family. As if that weren't enough, the leper couldn't approach the sanctuary to worship. They were cut off from God Himself. Therefore, he felt abandoned, forgotten, unworthy to not only approach your family, but to put themselves in the presence of God. The net result of leprosy disrupted communion, not only with everyone in his or her life, but also with God, since the religious and cultural belief of the time was that God must have cursed that person. And in some way, they deserved that illness. Although we now recognize that leprosy was not a result of moral offense on the part of the sufferer, this kind of disease was viewed as a powerful symbol of the effects of sin. As for us Christians, we're taught not to read these passages as simple historical events, what was regulated in the ancient Israelite Jewish community. But rather, these events are meant to give us some spiritual insight. There's more than just the physical decay of the body in leprosy that Jesus is trying to communicate to us and the gospel authors. You see, the story of the healing of the leper can help us gain insight into the spiritual reality of sin and how leprosy impacted the body and therefore that person's interaction with others. Sin does the same and worse. So what is sin? That's one of those words that people don't like to hear, never mind say, because it calls to mind judgment, right? It calls to mind maybe an antiquated sort of moral conduct measure. I mean, how do you see sin in the grand scheme of things, though? How do you understand the effects of sin in your life and in the life of those around you, which oftentimes are disconnected? Seeing the readings through the eyes of faith, we can see that, like leprosy, sin is a clinging contagion that contaminates the sinner, but also those around him or her. Like leprosy, sin destroys human relationships, and it destroys and certainly hinders our relationship with God. The word sin comes from an ancient word that was used in archery. It means to miss the mark. You see, sin is a spiritual leprosy. And what that means is, sin is contagious. And sin is something whose effects are isolating. Friends, do we think that our sin is something that is private? When we miss the mark in our moral conduct or in the life that the Lord asks us to live, that ultimately brings us freedom, do we think that the impacts are just on us? You see, because our sin doesn't have automatic or visible public effects, we often think that sin is just a private thing. The understanding that my personal or private sin is simply private is a fallacy. Bottom line. You see, the evil one, the devil, another name we don't like to hear or say, and even the brokenness of the world around us has confused us into thinking that as long as my sinfulness doesn't affect others, because it's private, then it's not a big deal. It's my issue to manage. Others shouldn't worry about it. But this is a huge spiritual mistake. And it's a misunderstanding of what sin is and what sin does. It's a misunderstanding in how we're made as human beings and how we interact with each other. That's just how we work. That's just not how sin works. Sin is always public. Because the effects of sin is never just private. Whether within the confines of our mind or in our homes, because the measure by which sin affects me, it affects those around me. My detachment or my attachment to worldly things, my attachment to the things that create an addiction possibly, it interacts with my relationship and affects my relationship with others. Friends, I think the message of today's reading is that sin is like leprosy. And at some level, we're all infected. And we all need help. It's interesting to note, by the way, that one of the effects of physical leprosy is anesthesia or numbness. So often what would happen with someone who has leprosy, their limbs would go numb. So much so that a person wouldn't even realize that they're bruised or cut or burned until they look and see the effects of that. And I'm sure that there's some of us who struggle with this kind of spiritual leprosy. A particular sin has become so commonplace, so normalized, that we no longer consider it harmful. We don't feel the pain until we see its effects. Or maybe we've grown so used to living with a particular sin that it's subtle. Harmful effects are no longer perceptible. We've grown used to it, if you will. The side effects of spiritual leprosy are staggeringly detrimental to our relationship with others, but most especially our relationship with God. But the good news is that spiritual leprosy brought about by the contagion of sin can be remedied. What is lost can be regained. There is healing. While for us misery can repel others, seeing a leper coming, you wanted to go in the opposite direction. It makes us want to look away, repulsed. But for Jesus, sin is like a magnet. It pulls him in, and it draws his merciful heart, and he feels compelled that he can't but help to bring us the relief that we long for. Confident and trusting in Christ's heart, we need to look our cynicism in the eye, and we need to say, "Begone, sin. Begone, Satan." We need to wake up ourselves from spiritual laziness and indifference. We need to recirculate that spiritual blood. Get it to flow so we feel the new energy. And like the leper in our gospel, more importantly, we need to go to Jesus with faith and say, "Lord, if you wish, you can make me whole. You can make me clean." You see, the greatest obstacle in our lives to wholeness, to healing, is ourselves. It's our pride. It's our unwillingness to admit the mistakes or the problems or the challenges that we have. It's so beautiful to see how the leper, he approaches Jesus. He humbles himself. He falls on his knees. And he says, how sad, right? Lord, if you wish, make me whole. Because he's probably sought help from so many other people. And he's been let down and neglected, given false hope. But he knows that this man is different. See, no matter what it may be that's isolating us from others, sin doesn't repel God. We're the ones who keep away from him. No matter how unclean we are, with whatever we may be struggling with, God longs for a relationship with us. Despite our misunderstandings that we aren't welcome or worthy or unable or deserve God's love, he shows us that it's in our sin where he wants to meet us, because that's exactly where we need him. So friends, as you approach Lent, what is the sin that's been keeping you away from others and maybe even keeping you away from God? Maybe it's something you've been struggling with for some time now. Maybe it's something you've ignored. Maybe it's a sin that keeps coming back and you're unable to shake it off. Maybe it's something which you respond, well, it's no big deal. No one else knows. It doesn't affect anyone else. And you've grown used to it. And maybe that's true. No one else has to know. But God knows. And he doesn't want you to live as a spiritual leper. He wants to make us whole. So here's an invitation for Lent. Maybe it's been a while. Receive the healing the Lord wants to give you. Take the time to go to confession. Maybe it's been weeks, months, years, decades. Allow the healing grace of God's goodness to meet you in your sin. Not only does he give us the healing, but the strength we need to live the life that he calls us to. But it's something we have to ask for, just like the leper in the gospel. And it's something God is so willing to give. But it's something that we need to ask. So hope to see you in confession if it's been a while, so that you may receive the Lord's goodness, his forgiveness, and his healing.